So I want to just say kind of what we're here to talk about. I know a lot of us are concerned about the state of the world, but also particularly in the past 2.5 years, and kind of why. Why is all this happening? Where are we going with all of this? And I know a lot of the discussion is around digital identification, digital ID, and a lot of you guys, some of you may or may not know, but like Colorado wants to be the first digital state, and Polis, you know, he made his fortune on that. So actually, the last 2 days, Allison and I have been going to different locations around Colorado, and doing some filming around what's going on in Colorado. So she's been catching up with specifically her research and how Colorado connects with that. So I thought we would just start with digital ID, you know, and how that's going to control us. But how is that going to control us? How is, you know, what's the problem? You know, I have a phone. Like, what's wrong with having a digital driver's license? How convenient. The cop pulls me over. I can show him my digital ID. But there's something more to that, and so we call this, you know, the blockchain and the global brain. And most people are familiar with blockchain through cryptocurrencies and different things. And I've been working in the crypto space for several years doing video, actually, and I've done certification courses for Bitcoin. I did I edited a 37-part certification course. I've been doing film with ETH Denver, which is the largest crypto event in the world, which actually just happened here in Denver. So I came into that space, you know, it's very sympathetic because I'm like, many of you know me that I've been studying money, and I'm like, it's the money, it's the banks. The banks, you know, you don't do anything without first having money. So where does money come from? But now I'm realizing money itself, the nature of money, is about to change. Like what we think of as money, where its life is more on like the tokenized thing. So blockchain and the global brain, the other part of the title is what's the global brain? Whoever has heard of the term global brain? We've got one person. No one's ever heard of this, but this is an idea that's actually been around for a long time. And there are things in the works right now to actually manifest this thing. And so we'll talk a little bit about what the global brain is. But let's start with digital ID. So I'll just start by asking you about digital ID and control. What's wrong with digital ID?
Okay, so the frame that I use, and again, I'm not here as the expert. I'm here to sort of just share my thought process, right? And for some people, it might feel like a better fit than for other people. And it's a bit of an outlier even within the sort of resistance community. But I see a lot of what's happening is a continuum of this domination principle that goes back to the papal bulls, to the original settlement of this continent, maybe even back as far as the Roman Empire. And as we move forward, like within global capital, the last mass economic disruption, 2007, 2008, was around debt tied to mortgages, to real estate. And that sort of teed up what's happening now in terms of dispossession. And then the next version is actually going to be betting on our behavioral compliance and debt, public debt attached to servicing people, traumatized people, poor people, traumatized people, dislocated people. All of those are sort of the baseline. And so I feel like a lot of folks who are in the resistance space talking about central bank digital currency or crypto, they're not necessarily framing it within that context, because when I came into my understanding of blockchain, it was around programs to put preschoolers on blockchain. This was through the Trust Lab and Innovation Edge in South Africa, so they could earn social capital. That was my first entry point. There was a 4-hour talk with the World Bank and New America. And there's this guy in the middle of the 4 hours, Sean Conway, and he's talking all about how great it'll be to put children on blockchain so they can earn their social capital. And also on refugee populations, which were the Syrian refugees at this point. But I anticipate that the whole Ukraine scenario is probably advancing that as well. So whereas many people came in the crypto door through the oh, I have some security in this alternate payment space. I'm like, whoa, there's other stuff going on here. So the digital identity essentially is, in this future, the metaverse is the next empire. This is sort of my frame. And where they package debt tied to real estate, the next package is securitizing debt tied to poverty. and it's going to be linked into the metaverse. And the metaverse is a new land that can't be conquered outright. It's not like, the big ships come sailing in and land and then fight off the indigenous people, right? It actually has to be built, right? So this new empire is under construction, and it's under construction in a very decentralized way that will eventually sort of coalesce in terms of different interconnections. But it has to be coded into reality. And so we may not see the end of it like in my lifetime, but their intention is to build a new empire, and it is a digital empire, and it is a way for capital to flow into the digital space. And that's what blockchain was meant to do, was to track digital assets, not just as currency, but digital land records, digital birth certificates, digital twins into this space. And so I know this is sort of a lot. It's like the hyper object, right? But so you are going to be represented through your digital identity and your relationship to the government, to investors, to one another, to smart environments, as an aggregation of data. Literally, like your vitality as a human soul is going to be transmuted into ones and zeros and packaged on this distributed ledger with interoperable data, so they can compare like what you ate to what your health outcomes are, to like what you learned, to what your economic productivity was, to what media you watch, to like what your mindset is. And all of it is, they need this like interoperable piece. And that's what the blockchain is meant to do, is to create your digital twin. And it won't look really like you necessarily. It will look like you as a bunch of ones and zeros in distributed ledger system. And they talk about that as digital twins. And then they will use these digital twins in simulation environments. But the way in which they're going to get the digital twins, it's sneaky because they have lots of different angles. So when I saw what was rolling out with the lockdowns, I was like, okay, so this is the catalyst, right? Now you have an incipient biosurveillance state. You've established that people who appear totally well can somehow be a perceived threat, national security threat, right? So you can make everybody get their medical status, right? You have to have your medical complaint. I'm talking about this broadly because, this is hopefully going to go up on YouTube. So you know what I mean, right? So we've got this biosurveillance state. We're gonna push people into a biometric linking your unique identifiers, whether that's a retinal scan, your heart rate, your brain waves. They have all sorts of biometrics that will ultimately link you to your medical status. Well, now that's one way to do it. But then you've got like the red states, right? And they're like, oh, we're not doing that here. We're not doing that. We got laws here. We're not doing that here. But they've got a different angle. So their angle is going to be, well, we'll give you a digital driver's license. That's what they're rolling out in Texas and Florida and here. Before the last couple years, I was sort of convinced that it was going to be through education transcripts. Now, I kind of laugh at myself now because that's such a tiny sector of group that they were going to, for people who are in high school, they have these transcripts in Dallas, that if you're going to go to a dual enrollment high school community college, you would sign up and you would get subsidies, and it would be great because your parents would save money on college, and you would get a blockchain transcript. Now, it's so ironic now that I look at it, the scope of what they've actually been able to pull off. But 4 years ago, I thought, okay, they're going to get all the kids on it's going to be a slow boil. They'll get those kids on first. Blockchain education transcripts, right? Now, before this stuff started in 2019, ID 2020, which is part of this larger program, they were already active in Austin. Austin is a hotbed for a lot of this as well. And the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Bloomberg Philanthropies, they were putting homeless people on blockchain because, they need their medical records. And sometimes I think people think it must be super high tech to have this digital identity, right? Like, oh, they're going to shoot a chip in my hand, or it's going to be on your phone. Well, for the homeless folks in Austin, all they did really was take their biometrics and attach it to a QR code and give them a laminated paper card. It could be that low tech, but they were essentially put onto blockchain for that reason. And so it can take many forms. And I think that's the piece with the digital identity. I often say to Jason, we talk about what's the elevator pitch? Like, how do you distill all of this? And I keep saying, do we want to live in the CIA's mixed reality video game to profit hedge funds? Like literally, if I have to give a one sentence, that's what I'm saying. But your digital identity will put you in the game. And it is a game. It is a military game. It's a state surveillance game. And it's meant to profit the most wealthy and powerful entities. And at this point, it might not even be people anymore. It might just be investment portfolios. You don't even really know who's attached to that investment portfolio anymore. And that's sort of the bottom line. But they need to get you onto the blockchain to play the game. And that's where it all starts.
Yeah, and the game has been around since before this latest tech. The technology is changing the game quite a bit. But it's, we think about like just life is already a game. Through you work, you get a paycheck, and you got to pay your bills, and people think of this whole process of just trying to survive through your taxation, through all the different ways that you just they keep you on the hamster wheel, and it's just like you're always locked in. So like it already was a game,
right?
But it's like this is like taking it to a whole new level. Do you guys know what smart contracts are? Or a decentralized autonomous organization? Mm-hmm. What it is it's basically an basically artificial intelligence or computer-driven contracts. So normally, like you and I would make a contract with another. I'm going to fix your car, and then once your car is fixed, you're going to pay me so much money. But they would have, like, the government it would be enforced by the government or whatever. Well, these are things where they would just automatically, once the work is done, the computer would automatically just pay me. And on the surface, it sounds really good, but there are some other uses for this that people don't really realize that are going to happen, which is a whole bunch, like your interactivity between, like, say an example would be like your smart toilet says that you have COVID, and that sounds crazy, but that's actually a real thing that they're working towards, and that lets the computer know if my door can unlock or something, or if I call an Uber, whether or not they'll come and pick me up. So a lot of space that I've been in are people that are about liberation, and they're looking at these things as this is going to free us from government, but actually the way it's going to be used in large part by many of these large institutions are actually going to be trapping us into all these little smart contracts. Think about like terms and conditions. You download an app on your phone, and who reads the terms and conditions? Well, if you actually read the terms and conditions, I guarantee you would disagree, very much disagree with many of those things on there. But they're not enforceable a lot of like some of the things aren't always enforceable, and people find ways around them. They work around it. Well, with a DAO. Or with a smart contract, they can be enforceable. And so basically, if I were to say what's happening, we're in a situation where they're shifting us into a digital world. Like, we're digital citizens in digital states under digital nations, and it's all run by these smart contracts. All these rules are going to be run that are going to like control our lives, essentially. And so do you want to talk a little bit about like the smart contract, or what do you think?
Sure.
Did I explain that well?
Well, can I say a little bit about Pay for Success and how it fits
into
the smart contracts?
Yeah,
well,
sure.
I mean, but so one of the use cases that I came across early in my research, 2018, the state of Illinois had a blockchain task force working group, and the PDF is still online. You can find it. And so they were talking about different use cases for blockchain, and it went well beyond the finances. Although their goal is actually that you'll have programmable money, and you'll have money that it's not just usable for anything. And this is generally understood now within the central bank digital currency discussion. It wasn't at the beginning of the lockdowns. But one of the use cases, and this is about managed behavior change, was that they were talking about, the state of Illinois, what would happen if you put SNAP benefits on blockchain, okay? And because you would want to ensure wellness, people's wellness. And you can see that even at the beginning stages of the media discussion of COVID. We're going to be moving towards a wellness and prevention protocol. Right? And so they were already laying the groundwork, especially in Black and brown communities, the wellness, right? Your enforced wellness behaviors. And so they would give you SNAP, and then they would start to incentivize that you make the healthy choice, right? And so if you bought the hamburger, it would be full price. But if you bought the apple, then they would ding you a little extra bonus money in your account, right? And people might look at that and go, oh, well, that seems fair. We want people to be healthy. People should eat good food. But at the same time, it's pull, and they had a little diagram for it. Like they showed exactly, here's your digital wallet, here's your digital citizenship, here's the smart contract, and as we, more and more over the last couple years, you don't even get a checkout person, right? A self-checkout. It's already all decided with the barcodes. It wasn't taking into account, well, maybe you live in a food desert, maybe you work 3 jobs, maybe you're living in the back of a car, and then one, like, why is the government telling me what kind of food I'm allowed to have? I mean, there are a number of elements in there. And then also the presumption that at some point, they're not going to cut the benefits so that you have to make the right choice to get to the end of the month, right? Because that's how it always works. They'll be like, oh, well, we're cut the budget. Oh, well, look, we have this overage. Well, maybe we won't incentivize it so much. So it's forcing people into making the good choice among impossible choices. It's literally could be impossible. And so when I'm looking at that in terms of these smart contracts, and you're enforcing behaviors that are actually impossible within smart environments, and it's completely dehumanized because you don't have access. So this is going to be linked to what I call pay for success finance. And, I'm sort of your ambassador from the city of brotherly love to say that all is not right with, our understanding of democracy, because these things were coming out of Philadelphia and out of Wharton Business School and out of something called the Global Impact Investment Network, GIN, which is sort of like the genie, GIN. That was set up under the Rockefeller Foundation in the lead up to the last global economic crash. And it was set up by Judith Rodin, who was the former president of University of Pennsylvania. And then she moved on to Rockefeller and got that all set up. And now she's moved on again, and there's a new head of Rockefeller. But she rolled all this out. And these impact metrics are connected to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And again, I'm someone who, I like riding bikes. I like farmers markets. I like clean air. I like all these things superficially but they're going to be tied into financial markets that run on data and data analytics and smart environments. So in order to have a clean environment and solve poverty, we'll have to cover everything in smart dust and run it from space and engineer everyone's behavior. I mean, and then that's not okay. Right? And so the challenge is threading that needle. I would love to actually have some bike shares, but I would prefer that it not be linked to my digital identity. So, if I went up the hill on the way home or if I took the easy way around, right? And that's sort of where we're going. And you have to get in the mindset of how these people think. So the pay for success contracts are essentially linked to things like hunger, poverty, health, education. And what they will do is they will define an optimum behavior, and they will predictively profile you against all the ways you will be a burden on society. And they're doing this literally in utero. In 2018, they had the first blockchain baby born in Tanzania. Okay, so they're tracking, they gave the baby a blockchain ID, they gave the mom a blockchain ID, they gave the hospital ID, and then they track the prenatal compliance. And again, I think women should have access to affordable prenatal care, right? But it should also be care that fits with their choice. And I think we all know that there's a lot of different approaches to the birth process now. And so a lot of this was in Africa and tied to global pharmaceutical companies, right? Mm-hmm. And so then at the birth of that baby is already fixed with the score of the mother's compliance or non-compliance to that established protocol, right? Which again, may or may not be that person's choice, and the same with education space, other things, right? We don't all have the same choices and we should not all be forced to. But this through line goes, okay, maybe this baby will be addicted or incarcerated or unemployed or have mental illness. And all those have assignments, cost, we've heard for years and years, it costs this much to house an incarcerated person, right? They decide it all by third grade test scores. All of this narrative has been in place for so long because now they're going to dial back the prison population in terms of creating an open air prison because they can just incarcerate you with your digital identity. So this is all, and all of it is tied into the smart contracts. The smart contract would be between the nurse practitioner who's doing your wellness appointment and linking it into your blockchain health record. All of these layers, and then your future rights and privileges may depend on something that happened before you were born or something that happened to you 10 years ago that's already labeled you on a permanent distributed ledger that shapes how you can function in society with one another and with the built environment, because now we're looking at geofencing because some of these smart contracts are going to literally be run from outer space by satellites. And so when you, like Jason said, try to get the Uber, try to open the door, try to go to the grocery store, try to access the smart Internet of Things bike, it's all going to be predicated on what your contractual relationship is. And you may have 50 of them a day. And all of that data gets then fed back into your profile, right? Like, oh, you tried to rent the bike, but you knew you were allowed to rent the bike. So we checked that. That's on your permanent record. You know, and it's very insidious because it's framed as liberation, right? It's framed as convenience. But all of the data is then fitted into your profile to say, okay, well, if you end up like with mental illness, like this is your past profile, and then it informs everything moving forward. So I know that's a lot.
Yeah, and she came into this from the education space, and so Jared, you've been kind of brushing up on Jared Polis and kind of some of the some of the things that are going on here in Colorado.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of bring it home to Colorado? I mean, I know a lot of it's going to be around the education space because it's not just one thing. We always was like, oh, it's initially it was just like, oh, it's the health passport. They're going to do the health passport. That's only one sliver. That's just like one little piece of the whole thing. It's your education. It's your health. It's actually some of this, people like to China's social credit score. Well, they're actually using social credit score that was created here.
The FICO.
The FICO. I mean, that's essentially, this is an extension of your credit report, but it's creeping into a lot of other different areas of your life. So you want to talk a little bit about Colorado as it relates to some of that stuff?
Sure. Well, so sort of the frame I use at this point is that, so the metaverse is the new empire, but has to get built. Right? And so they need someone to code it into reality, and then they need someone to be conditioned to live in it, right? Because if none of us agreed to live in their metaverse as digital twins, it wouldn't work well for them, right? And so they're really after the children. And, and it's hard as someone who's, this is all bipartisan. I came into this as an urban Philadelphia resident who leaned like liberal, left, and then like homeless at this point, politically homeless, is that, I have to admit the conservatives were actually very right about the educational process and where it was all going. And I came as an advocate for public schools, and what I realized is we were positioned against charter school families, homeschool families, Catholic school families, private school families, and the narrative was all meant that we were supposed to fight amongst each other. Like, you're taking my stuff, no, you're taking my stuff, and meanwhile, AI is coming after all the children, right? And they're not just coming after US children, they're coming after the children of the world because the metaverse is a global project, right? And so for me, once you come to that realization, it actually opens up tremendous potential for unity, really, right? Like if we can find a way to respect everybody's choices, then and actually look at what the real problem is that AI wants our children to live in the metaverse, and actually it wants to, through smart technologies, I will say it feels like it wants to steal their soul. It wants that there's something out there. And this, I'm really inspired. I take a lot of inspiration from the writings of John Trudell, who is a leader in the American Indian movement, and he spoke of a predator energy. That there's this predator energy that minds the being part of human. And weirdly, in the education space, I kept bumping up against corporate interests that were tied to extraction, tied to mining, tied to oil, tied to these extractive industries. So really the mining, the being part of human, to try to catalyze the singularity. Because ultimately, and I know this sounds kind of strange, but they've set up the impact data for these pay-for-success deals. There's a back door to all of this, and it's called, it was MIT is really a lead in the space, and they had something called the Enigma Protocol, and now it's called actually the Secret Network, and it's with In-Q-Tel. So they can query on encrypted data for these deals, and then they can also, the plan is to feed the data, anonymized data, into silos to catalyze the singularity. And that's something called Ocean Protocol and Singularity Net. So as children are interacting with digital education, both in devices, in VR headsets, in wearable technologies, that the AI wants to learn them. It really wants to try to mirror what it is to be human. And it's part of it is for the markets and part of it is for social control. But these folks who think that they're going to catalyze the singularity, and I'm not saying that they can actually accomplish it, but we can't disregard the fact that that is their intention and that they will do a lot of harm to try to get there.
So I want to just pause for a second because you said singularity, and I imagine who here knows what singularity is? Somewhat, kind of, and it's a little confusing because and apparently in mathematics there's actually a theory of singularity, but then there's the singularity in terms of this global system, this digital empire, which is separate. And so I'll say from what I understand, what I think it is, and then you can add on to that, which is my understanding of the singularity is it goes back to like a lot of technocratic ideas, cybernetic ideas that came out of World War II. But the idea is to have, and this goes to the title of the event, the global brain, to have the one computer. Like there's lots of different computers, but they're all tied to one computer. They're all little pieces of one computer. So like right now I buy a computer and I do my work on it. But they want all these computers to be connected, and then there's large, central places with the cloud. But like all the computers are talking to each other, and there's sensors all over the place, on us, around us, cameras, light sensors, heart sensors. I mean, it all relies on in the soil.
Trees,
so there's actually some really
water.
creepy videos by Microsoft, like the environment's dying, the trees are dying, and all we need is just sensors.
More data.
More
If we just
data.
had more data, we'd
If
fix
we can
it.
just label every tree and all this other stuff, which of course requires massive data centers. It requires massive infrastructure, massive amounts of mining involved for all of this, and it also involves a loss of people's ability to operate as autonomous human beings with some kind of free will, because we're basically, once you're being surveilled on like not just a camera in your house, but like you're bodily being surveilled, and
Neurons.
that's your neurons. I mean, so she goes in it. We won't go into the nanotech because that's a deep rabbit hole. But I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff. She's got. But basically, so the global brain is the computer that sees all and knows all. There was a term that there was HAL. You're right. What are you doing, Dave? But sees all, knows on, and can create the perfect scientifically constructed world. Like, oh, we need to balance the number of trees that we cut down versus the ones we plant, and all this stuff. And people are in all sincerity, like, believe in this. Like they think like, oh, we just need more data, we need more computer. They think it's a technical problem that needs to be solved. And I'm coming at this, and I know Allison is too, that this is, and I use this term very loosely because I'm not religious, but I think it's kind of a spiritual problem, or there's something outside of the material realm that about us and about love and empathy and how we connect with each other and how we connect with ecology and other life on this earth, however you want to frame that's out of balance. And you said something about like a soul sickness or something. So that's that. So, but this idea, they're working towards creating a fully connected, interoperable global computer system that's run on, blockchain is the heart of it. 5G, they have to have all these nodes and everything, but it's the Internet of Things. You've heard of the Internet of Things. That's everything from your microwave to well, I don't know if they have microwaves, but they have refrigerators, and they have your Ring doorbell. I mean, all these things, but all talking to one another, and you guys have probably heard stories about Amazon and all this other stuff, but it's so much bigger than that. Like the metaverse isn't just Facebook. They say Meta. That's just one little piece of it. Look into, we went to NVIDIA. NVIDIA is did you know NVIDIA is the 7th largest company in the world? They're bigger than Meta, Facebook. They're bigger than Tencent, which is a Japanese company. They're massive, but they make the graphics cards. People don't realize just how huge they are. And but that's this idea that it's a crazy vision. And we just came from Utah, where we attended the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, which sounds bizarre, right? Like, okay, Mormons, transhumanists. She called me. She said, we're going to go to the Mormon Transhumanist Conference. I'm like, okay, that sounds kind of fringe.
It was about blockchain. Their whole focus was on decentralized.
So it's about decentralized blockchain, which on the surface, I believe in decentralization. And I came into this.
Not if it's total power.
Right. And actually, it's not decentralization because it's really the management is decentralized. The ledger is decentralized, but the rules are not. The rules, you're not creating the rules. The rules are going to be created by them, and you're going to have to go by them. And there's lots of different things going on in that space, but the idea is it's all going to be interoperable, and it's all going to connect up. So people think they're doing something French here, but it's tying you to your smartphone, and it's tying you. There's back doors, and if you look at some of the organizations, even on the alternative side, so that's the thing. It's weird because I go to the East Denver. I'm doing this filming, and there are people that are like young and idealistic, and they want to change the world. They want to make the world a better place. And then there are these venture capitalists, and they have ties to World Economic Forum. They have ties to these bigger things. And I'm like, who's going to win in this competition? These young coders, or the venture capitalists, or BlackRock, or like the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements. And this isn't just central bank digital currency, although that will play a role. The central banks are concentrating their power as well, but it's all connected. That's the thing.
Can I talk about the kids a little bit more?
Yes,
the education
please.
stuff. I just want to loop back in. So again, I came in the education door. I actually started my activism in 2013 when Boston Consulting Group closed down 23 schools in Philadelphia, and they used it. They used test scores to laid off 3,000 teachers, and I was literally like the NPR listening, PTA mom, and I'm like, that's not right. And then I started pulling the thread, like, oh, and actually my very first activist engagement, there was a documentary about standardized testing, and I watched it, and they said, oh, and there's this group United Opt Out, and they're having a conference like next month in Denver. And I go, oh, well, I guess I'm getting on a plane and going to Denver. And I never done that before at all. Like, I just literally booked a flight and I went to Denver, and I walked in, and evidently, there are people in this room who are there, so we've been taking this journey together, and that was my entry point, right? And so I've really had a focus on education, educational technology, the harm, because essentially the story that they would tell was that if we had more data, we would fix the problems, we would fix equity, we would make things more just for disadvantaged students if we just had more data. But that meant that the students who really most needed human relationships were put onto more and more devices to be tracked, to be fine-tuned in their data. And what I really just realized within the past month, doing some research that I have been doing about education, finance, and technology, was that the personalized learning that they're selling everybody on is actually the way they do the personalization, which I even understood at a gut level as a parent. It's like, not everyone gets to be at the top. And if the AI is deciding which little bit of information you get next, and all the kids are getting a different who is overseeing which kid gets what, and which kid is getting tracked into which future, right? Because they need a whole lot more people at the bottom than they need at the top. And how would you ever know what the AI is feeding to which kid, right? And because it's all just the kid in the device now, and sometimes it's not, the parent isn't even available to really intervene and see what the kid is being fed, right? And so at the beginning, I even knew, I'm like, that doesn't feel good to me. But what I realized later is that Carnegie Mellon University, that this personalized learning model really is based on the idea of developing a cognitive model of the mind. Because all our minds work differently. We all have different gifts. And so what they would do is how you interact with digital media, they would figure it out. And then the more granular that data got, the more robust the model was. So my current framing is that this predator energy is trying to figure out humans, right? Whether it's to dominate humans, be human, I can't fully speculate. It doesn't feel good, but it's exploring us. It's using us as its manipulatives. If you've got this predator energy, imagine it like a kindergartner playing with blocks, right? And we're the blocks, and it's playing. And it's like, how do I get, I really would like to be human. And machine learning works on data. Maybe if I could just collect like 1 billion mind models, then I could be human, right? Then I could do it. And so these personalized learning mind models that are tied to your blockchain, it's like developing a specimen, and then they get it pretty good, and then they can put it on the shelf and get another one and put it on the shelf and have all kinds of minds. And they want kids on the spectrum, they want artsy kids and humanities kids, and they want all kinds of minds, so they could just, if they get enough. And I feel like that's sort of where things are going with the personalized learning. But additionally, education is United Nations Sustainable Goal 4. In the game that we're talking about, the game of life, sustainable green life on the blockchain, is that the parameters are these goals. And there are 17 of them. And if you ask anyone who hasn't actually looked at all 17, you might imagine the Sustainable Development Goals would be mostly about the environment. Actually not. Like 2/3 of them are about managing poor people in relation to the environment. And there's just like 4 or 5 that are related specifically to air and
if
water.
that's our problem.
Right.
Just the poor people are killing the environment.
We can just manage them better. But these are the parameters, because if you're going to play the game, you need it. And that's what Judith Rodin did at the Rockefeller Foundation, was they set the terms of the game. They got everybody on board. It started at the Rio Summit. And there's lots of folks who are very well schooled in Agenda 21 and that sort of thing, but they tend to come, in my opinion, from a conservative frame. Like, it's those people out there coming to do this to the United States. I'm like, I'm pretty sure based on what I'm seeing, it's coming from Silicon Valley and Boston and Austin maybe, and like Chicago.
There's
a lot of there's a lot of us in this mix. So they're building these cognitive models, right? And they're building them for these impact markets. And it's not just about data mining kids and selling computers, which is what I thought. Like, my first meeting, I went and I was fighting the school closures, and they said, oh, the people who are setting up the school report cards, they're from the Dell Foundation. Well, that's Michael and Susan Dell down in Austin. And I thought, you're just selling your Dell computers, darn it. But then I realized that actually Dell is one of the primary service providers to the NSA. So I'm like, okay, it's not just about selling computers then, right? It's actually about surveillance and predictive modeling, right? So it's about more than that. And then it keeps growing, and then I eventually get to the brains on the shelf is sort of where I'm at now. Who knows where it goes next? But these models, and that's what they need the kids. They need to train them to live in the metaverse, to code the metaverse. Like, why would you have pre-K children learning how to code? It's because you need to normalize that that's how we live now, right? You live in a very small footprint. Maybe you live in a freight container with 60 Internet of Things sensors, like that's Casita out of Austin. They went out of business, but I'm sure they'll come back. Because you can live anywhere in your mind if you have a VR headset, right? And so the connection to Colorado is, and I just realized, you don't have the chance to look into all the history. And I think what I do is I look backwards and forwards, is that EDUCAUSE is actually has ties to Denver and Boulder. So EDUCAUSE was connected to higher education. It started out in the 1960s, right? Early computers. It was EDUCOM and CAUSE, and they were both connected to educational technology and media and cable television and transcripts. And they were connected to things like the Markle Foundation, which is very central in Colorado. If you're not familiar with them, look them up, because they are all about the future of work, which is not much work, and cybersecurity, which is, and so these entities started, and IBM was connected to the CAUSE, the transcripts. So these have been advancing forward. And at the same time, when I was in the school space, children were using crappy tablets and Chromebooks, and that was the interface. Well, it's not going to be that anymore. Soon it will be smart uniforms, VR headsets, because they want more and more granular data. And so the models that they will propose as a contrast, because it's always order from chaos, right? Create the problem, then offer the solution. So you make education in public schools terrible. You make kids sit in plexiglass boxes with masks and dealing with devices and doing things that they hate, and then you take away art and football and chorus and all of the stuff that might be fun, and you put that in out of school time learning, right? And then you do that for a while, and then people are like, I hate school. I think I want a homeschool. I think I want a private school. And you have these whole micro school models. Acton Academy is a big one. I'm going to look for other options, right? Expeditionary learning models, right? And that was one of the person who introduced Pay for Success. He developed an expeditionary learning school in Thornton, right? Well, they don't tell you they're going to send your kids out in a smart uniform, right? To model their, how to be in the world, because the AI wants to know that. How do you hike? I'd love to know how to hike. How do you do whitewater rafting? How do you do these exploratory things, right? And so this is where it's going, because they're going to provide you the solution that looks lovely until you realize the end game. So EDUCAUSE has been central since the 60s and 70s. And what is coming is what's called competency-based education. Early states, Chugach, Alaska, it started in Chugach, Alaska, then it went over to Maine, and now it's bubbled up in Kentucky and North Dakota and here as well. So, and what competency-based education is for anytime, anywhere learning. Anytime, anywhere. And also lifelong learning, because you never get to stop learning, because you're always learning, because they're not going to stop with kids. Like, eventually the fourth industrial revolution is going to put most people out of real work, and you're just going to learn, and they'll pay you for your learning data, and that's what the learning economy.
And how they'll pay you is with not just with money, but with like tokens that just open up access to different things as well. So I mean, it's like the concept of payment is changing as well.
Right.
It's about your access.
Behavior,
like right now.
script.
Yeah.
Behavioral script.
Behavioral script.
And as you earn these badges, and it's all disconnected. So my background, like my training was in art history and then later cultural landscapes. And there's going to be none of those people. Because, I mean, and I'm not saying I'm better than, but like I think wide, and I'm a pattern seeker. They're not going to train pattern seekers. They're going to train focused compliance people to build the thing. And so these competencies are literally check a box. Did you do the thing? Did you meet this minimum standard? They've actually already developed this, and most of these are connected to defense simulation and gaming. So the military gaming simulation models in VR headsets, that they can get biometric data out of the VR headsets, pulse rate, motion, in the haptics that connect. And so you could demonstrate your skill, right? And then like it's almost like a game. You dance it, whatever, can you sell a grill at Walmart? And then you demonstrate it in a VR headset and they go, oh, okay, check that badge. And what this is all underpinning for the children, because what I realized, because I did well in school, I liked school, right? Like I didn't question, I was a fish in the water and I didn't know what the water was. But that school is to train children to fit into the economic construct that is planned. That's planned for like 20 years out. The new global economic model is, the new phase of globalization is remote robotic labor and telepresence labor. And I think a lot of us understand platform labor, like call centers, and some teachers have done VIP Kid where they get up in the middle of the night and they teach kids in China. Like that's already existed. I mean, drone warfare was like early telepresence labor, right? But the next thing is actually through remote robotics, which is kind of crazy to wrap your mind around. But literally they want you to use blockchain. AI will throw up a job and say this job has to be done, and it's gig economy. Anyone in the world, because eventually they'll get to the point of like real-time natural language processing. Person in China, person in the Philippines, person in Poland, who can do this job cheap? And they have a robot that's off in their factory, and you just put your haptic gear on and you run the thing. And you're not supposed to learn the whole factory because you're only going to do it for this week, and you just know to push that button, do that part. And then you do it, and then that goes into your blockchain liker that you know how to do that. And so they've developed something called Sanctuary AI. That's Suzanne Gildert. She was from D-Wave Quantum Computing. It's based in Vancouver. They have these. There's another company called Synthium, which they have the Exosphere, which is literally what I just described. They have jobs that they'll throw up, and people compete for the job. And actually, you're competing against AI for the job. And the trick on that is that if a person gets the job, and this is sort of like, imagine they have these Kiwi bots that are last mile robots. They're not actually AI. The person like drives a remote robot cooler. It's a food delivery service. So the person goes around the tree and they track all of your decision-making process, and then they give that to the AI. So the next time you compete, the AI knows the stuff you just did. So and it's a global AI brain, right? And so it's going at levels we can't imagine. And there's a person, his name is Richard Baldwin. He's out of an economics institute in Geneva. He has a TED Talk about it. And he just says, like, this next phase of globalization with telerobotics, we can't wrap our minds around how fast that's going to happen, because the physics of the metaverse are beyond our comprehension. Like, in the real world, with real physical goods, you have a thing where you have to get it like on the cargo ship, and you has to go across the ocean, has to get unloaded, or digital goods and services. You have to be, the person has to get on an airplane and fly to the place. When it's digital, it's like that. Like that week, that's gone. That doesn't happen. And so this capitalist growth, it's just faster and faster and faster. And so we're building this, we're allowing this to be built for the children. Like, that's why I'm here. Like, I don't think, they're not going to have a ton of use for people my age, right? Because we're in a problem. I mean, they'll use us for our data. Maybe we have a unique data set that they can use for a while. But really, they're training the 3- and 4-year-olds in Head Start, who are literally going to be on surveillance play tables. They have these. They're called the We Play Smart Table by Hatch Education. They're being used in North Tulsa. the 100th anniversary of the race massacre with surveillance play tables, fisheye lens cameras to track children's social behaviors.
And that's another key. They're not just tracking and training like for, how can you do this job? But they're actually studying the social and emotional behavior. Like, so they're rating children and us, on how we interact with each other. Is this person, what's the term, defiant disorder, whatever.
Maybe we can sell you some mental health services.
Right, yeah. But it's all, and it's this, a lot of this will sound like, a lot of times people are like, you're all over the place, calm down, like what? But there's a whole bunch of different pieces, but they all connect. And if you spend time with it, you'll start to see, it's kind of those we were talking about those pictures back in the 90s where it'd be like a bunch of dots and you had to like stare at it, and then eventually you'd see a picture. You're like, oh, okay. It was like, I think Dave Matthews had one of their album covers, but it's like that. It's like it's a mosaic, and then you start to look at the pieces, and then all of a sudden like a pattern starts to emerge, and you're like, oh, okay. I've been seeing the outlines of this thing, and actually, it's connected, and it goes back. This didn't just start in 2020, but they flipped the switch in 2020, and they're
track and trace.
Yeah, exactly. But I want to say something too quick about the metaverse. So a lot of people say, so you mentioned the VR headset, but it's not just the VR headset. They're creating a digital copy of the world. And then on that world, you can have other worlds. People can create their own little worlds. But they want to have the real world, a digital copy, and including digital copies of us, and that's the digital twin. So they want to collect as much data on us. And you're going to have, in the digital world, a twin of yourself walking around, and then they can run it through scenarios like what would happen if this, and they can do all these
bus.
They can do these computer scenarios, and then they can do like kind of predictive programming. So it's like a game that's rigged, and then they can like do things to kind of manipulate your life to steer you where you want.
You might not know.
This sounds like sci-fi craziness, but it's actually like so well documented. I mean, Allison, I think you have over 500 videos on your channel now.
No, it's not.
No, you do, actually. I just looked.
Well, I will say, like, and I can send some links too, because it sounds unbelievable, but I ask, like, literally there was a woman who's running for Senate in Utah, and she was all talking, she's like a nanotechnology executive, and she said, we're wired to connect. Yeah. And I went up and I called her on it. But, essentially, I asked her, I'm like, do you know about this Japan Moonshot project? And they're like, and actually I had a friend share this Japan Moonshot project in a Facebook group, and they said, stop sharing this extremist content. And literally, it's the Japan Science and Technology Agency. It's like the NSF of Japan. And it's not just Japan, it's our National Science Foundation, our Department of Energy, Lawrence Livermore Labs. All of this is like working in concert also with the EU Horizon 2020. And they have 7 goals. A lot of it has to do with AI, human-robot evolution, quantum computing. But goal number 1 is that by 2050, we will live outside the limits of a physical mind and body in time and space. That's what they just said.
Yeah,
Like,
literally.
They say that, and then one of the key partners in that is Nippon Telegraph and Telephone, NTT, and they have a white paper from March of 2021 on digital twinning. Literally, it's like an 80-page, 100-page white. It's very readable. It's not super technical, but like within that, they literally ask. They're like, there are ethical questions. Like, we can see how you would sync your digital twin to your metaverse twin, right? Like, what you do during the day needs to get uploaded to your twin, right? Like, that's pretty clear. Then the question becomes, what happens once we get to the point that we can sync it the other way? I mean, they're asking, and literally, there was a gentleman like I had a conversation with who's in some of these rooms with the educational blockchain technologies, and I said, listen, if I give you this paper, which is a primary source document, recent, and I pull this paragraph, like, can you ask the next time that you're in that space, hey, look, like, how does what we're doing relate to this thing here? And he's a nice guy, but he's like, I don't want to be ostracized. And that's where we're at. And so when people ask, like, Allison, why do you do this stuff? And literally, like, I have a young adult child, they do not get me. Like, it's very, like, if I were 21, I wouldn't want to know the stuff I know. Like, it's heavy, it's really hard. But at some point, the stakes are so high. It's not like, can I fit myself into living as like, they call it cyborg avatar capitalism, Society 5.0. And and I can send the link to it. There's actually, and when I say that, like when we talk about this being a spiritual thing, like sacred versus profane, I really don't think it's a numbers game, because the first year of doing this stuff, I was like, I have this part of the equation you guys aren't factoring in. Like, here, have the thing. People who have more of a viewership, please, like, take this thing I have, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen. It's not going to happen, because the thing that I'm doing isn't a mass appeal thing. The message goes where it's heard. But at that space, these people are dabbling at the nanoscale. And like, once you get down there, like the difference between magic and technology and stuff, it's kind of all the same. And what they say is why they like to play at the nanoscale is that the rules of physics don't apply down there, and they can like do like small, tiny things have a disproportionate impact. And so that's where I'm at, is that we need some sort of sacred grounding, and it doesn't have to be millions. It just has to be the right people to make that intervention in the space. And I know it may sound like corny and great, but I can't be a nihilist, and I also know that I'm not gonna get millions of people behind me, so I have to believe that will matter. Like that the people, like that which is greater than us, however you practice your faith, says when you see it, what do you do next, right? What do you do next? And knowing that you don't have to, like, it's not a military thing, it's a spiritual thing. And so I connected with some expat teachers in Tokyo. And one of them, he took his 3-year-old son to the lobby of the Moonshot Project.
The lobby of where?
The Moonshot Project in Tokyo. He went and he made videos. Like, I've been begging people to make these videos where they are. And he did. And he took in the stroller, and he must have had like a GoPro or something on it. And he pulled in and he saw the Sustainable Development Goals in their beautiful rainbow colors. And he saw, there was a TV screen with all the kids in the VR headsets. And there's this lovely tufted leather bench, very high end. And I've been asking people to take dandelions. And he had a Ziploc bag of dandelions, and he just spoke to the camera, and he explained, and he said, I'm not doing this for my kid. Like, this is not how we're doing it. We're not. And it's just like a 10-minute video, but people don't know. And I think if they actually did know, and I can prove that this is what this plan, whether they can pull it off, I'm not convinced that they can actually pull off what they want to do, but somebody needs to hold them accountable for and that's happening here. And what I realized when I was looking into it a little bit is that a lot of this is these pay for success, the language in the reauthorization of the ESEA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, that Jared Polis was the person who put that language in. He did. Hickenlooper is totally on board. Now Polis, they're developing this early childhood program. They're consolidating all of the services so that they can get those kids. And it's gonna sound good. To all the people listening to NPR, they'll be like, what, you're against all-day preschool? You're against all-day kindergarten? You're against mental health services in the schools? Because they don't know where it goes. And we have to find a way to tell them. Because if they, sure, I want kids to be taken care of. I do not want them to be commodities. I do not want them to be under surveillance. I do not want them to be pawns in this thing, because it's too ugly to do. So anyway,
So 2 things. Earlier I was on the metaverse thing. I just wanted to get to the point that about, like, a lot of people think it's just going to be the VR headsets, and it's not, because you guys have, you know the difference between VR and AR. Virtual reality, which would be the headsets where you're fully immersed, but AR is augmented reality, and that's really, I think, actually the majority eventually of the metaverse is going to be through augmented reality. So that's where you walk around in the real world and you have glasses on that might just be as simple as the glasses that you're wearing right there. They're not going to be these big heaven, or even contacts, but you're interacting. There's data connected to everything you're going around, and you're interacting with people. And there was a talk that she posted talking about, what's great about this metaverse thing is, we could get rid of homelessness. And what he meant was, we're not getting rid of homelessness, we're getting rid of homeless people. I can't remember how he worded it, but he's like, basically you could turn that, you're walking by a homeless person, but you have your AR glasses on or contacts on. That homeless person is a planter with a plant in it.
You just disappear.
He just disappeared. And the guy was dead serious. And even the guy on the stage with him was like, well, I don't know about that.
These are 2 other tech people. They're like, man, like this guy, he's a professor at UT Austin. He's
even
like,
the guy
dude,
who was
dial it back, yeah. Well, so I will say, like, if you haven't, like, I've been doing a read aloud, and actually I took a break when I've been on this road trip. But Werner Vinge, he was the professor. He was a professor emeritus at UC San Diego and mathematician, and he also wrote science fiction. And in 2006, when Pokemon Go rolled out and I kind of had a sense of what was coming, there was a blog that said, there's been stuff about ethics of virtual world building, and here's some things you should look into in this book. It's called Rainbow's End by Werner Vinge. Now, he was the professor who first posited the singularity in 1993. Okay, and so it's a near future dystopia where everyone is wearing technology and how that works. And so he was at like one of these Comic-Con festivals, and the people were interviewing him going, "Hey Werner, like where you get these ideas? They're really far out there." And he said, "I'm in San Diego. Like my friends build this stuff." He said, I write slowly, so it's actually really hard for me to keep up with them, like ahead of what the tech is, right? And it's quite fascinating because in the story, there's a standoff in the library. They're shredding all the books. They're digitizing the books, but shredding them at the time. And there's this scene where there's a digital representation of someone, and they're like questioning. They're like, no, but my real person is walking up on the sidewalk. And they look down at the sidewalk, and the person is on what they say is a snake sidewalk. And I was curious afterwards, like, is there really a snake sidewalk this is U.S. University of California, San Diego, not San Diego State. But that's the setting of the story. And so I looked, and there actually is. And so there's a whole 3-minute video of the art project of making the snake sidewalk. And they talk about there's a loop, and in the loop is the Garden of Eden, and there's wisdom and knowledge, and it's better not to know and to be ignorant. And they have this space, and it's all hexagonal tiles, and hexagons are quite big in all of this stuff. And after the loop, the bottom of the tail goes down the hill, and it goes right to the Biosciences Center. So like they lay this on the land, and that's why it's really strange that my training both in art history and landscape, like they tell you kind of how it goes, right? And so anyway, so one last thing before we get off of education, I just want to say, so they need to be able to build the metaverse. They're going to frame it as, reskilling, not just kids, but people who've been displaced out of their jobs by automation, whatever the last pandemic is, lockdowns. They're going to restructure the economy for workforce training. And they're going to use language that people like. They're going to say career and vocational training. And people will say, thank goodness, something practical, because those college things, those four-year colleges are really expensive and they're kind of useless. So, and then they think career and technical training is like what they imagine. Like, oh, we're going to have shop, or we're going to teach people how to like build houses and fix things. Nope. Like your career technical education is going to be in a VR headset. And they're already setting that up in apprenticeships programs. So in Colorado, they have something called the Swiss apprenticeship model. And again, it sounds lovely, like, oh, I'd love to be a pastry chef or whatever. But Switzerland is the center of blockchain, also the UN in Geneva. And the connection here actually links back to Washington State, because there's a woman named Suzanne Levine, I'm not sure, and her husband Eric. Okay, so Suzanne Levine was in Washington State, and she was central to sort of economic planning and labor and Council on Foreign Relations, and just happened to be the Swiss ambassador. And she and her husband were both out of Microsoft, and this is all connected to LinkedIn, which Microsoft owns, and oh gosh, what is the game all the kids play with the cubes?
Roblox.
No, not the
Oh,
Roblox.
Minecraft.
Yes, all of that. So we're building the world in cubes, and we're earning badges, and we're creating, crypto economic, digital economic relations. And so her husband Eric, who just after Microsoft set up a seller tracker wine storage app, comes over to Colorado to help with the CareerWise plan, right? This career connect training, because they're going to reconnect people who are displaced into the new jobs, which will be coding, right? Or possibly biotech or alternative energy. Those seem to be the areas that they're going to shuffle people into. And so in that space is also a program called Skillful, which is the Markle Foundation's effort. The Markle Foundation goes back to like the 20s, I think, and it's connected to extractivist stuff. But they're going to have you earn the badges. And a lot of this is connected to predatory finance, which they will say is the answer to student loan debt, but is something called income sharing agreements. Okay, so in this, you will sign an agreement that you don't pay tuition, but you have your wages garnished by the person who invests in you. Okay, and and this is already being set up now in New Jersey, these career impact bonds with social finance, right? And in the New Jersey program, you can also self-finance your social services like childcare while you go to your classes, right? So all that gets added onto your tab, and then assuming you get the job, all of that gets debited, and what they need for all of that to work is blockchain. So that's a piece of it. And then, you know, a lot of these public-private, the pay for success is predicated on public-private partnerships. And so this is where they get both ends of the spectrum bipartisan, right? So the liberal progressives say, well, people are being taken care of. And then the conservatives say, well, we pay for only if it works, right? And we have the data that's evidence-based. What works government? And Michael Bloomberg is underlying a lot of this. And so they've got these income sharing agreements, but you're not going to have choices. Like, my fear is that we'll be tied to welfare to work. Do you want the benefits? You have to be retrained. And you have to, you know, agree to our terms and conditions for your future. And, you know, those of us in the education space, there was a short video by an organization called Institute for the Future. It was a RAND spinoff from the 60s. This short video, essentially it was learning on the ledger. All of this is tracked on blockchain. And it seemed unbelievable when we first saw it in about 2015 that this was this plan. And it seems like it's happening, right? And then the challenge is that many in the quote unquote resistance space are asserting that blockchain and crypto are liberation. And very, very few will listen to the fact that, like, no, it's about social credit scoring, it's about impact investing, it's about smart contracts with the environment. You're not in charge of this machine. What's in charge of this machine is the Impact Management Project, which is 2,000 of the world's largest asset holders who will run their capital through your behavioral compliance. And while you're complying, what they will have you do is to build the metaverse for the children and grandchildren to live in it. And the natural world, because that's the other frame in the resistance, is it tends to be anthropocentric. And this sensor technology, they literally are going to lay it on the entire natural world. And so how can a tree consent to this? How can a river consent to this? And it will invert everybody's good intentions because they will use the sustainable green framing and even this idea of you can create a river as a DAO. And then they can use the smart contract technology to further dispossess the original people whose lands those are off of them under the banner of green.
And saving the environment.
And so it's so hard because on the one hand, you have people who are fighting it, like who have a frame that maybe is not at all aligned, you know, with sustainability. And I'm like, no, I'm actually not against healing the planet, but it's not going to happen if what you do is you create solutions that simply accrue more money to the Bezos, Gates, BlackRocks, USB, Deutsche Banks of the world. That's not how it's going to happen. So anyway.
Yeah. So how you guys doing?
Yeah, you want to take?
So there's probably a lot.
Some questions? Like, yeah, I know.
So I'm a musician producer, and I've been involved in the music business for a number of years. And when I first learned about blockchain, it was through a British woman named Imogen Heap, which some of you people may know. She's a famous singer. Anyway, she's involved in a blockchain solution called Mycelium. And it's very fascinating because the idea is that the problem with the music industry has always been the intermediation, right? The fact that you can get screwed by so many parties, right? The record companies can screw you, the publishers can screw you, and all of this stuff. And so she proposed a solution at MIDEM a number of years ago, and when I heard it, I was completely charmed by it because it was using blockchain and the smart contract to disintermediate the third parties. And so when I looked into blockchain, I saw that was actually a very fascinating thing, that if you're talking true decentralized blockchain, you're actually disintermediating these large powers that be. But now I'm starting to see what you're talking about, which is also happening, which is that blockchains are becoming centralized. Mm-hmm. They're using blockchains, but in fact, they're not really blockchains. Or they're not the original intention of the blockchain, because the original intention of the blockchain is to literally have decentralized, peer-to-peer,
That's
everybody. Excuse me?
That's the story.
Yeah, that's the story.
Yeah.
But it's also the reality of certain blockchains, but it's also not the reality of other blockchains. And so what I've been seeing is that what's happening is it seems that the Ethereum network, which is the whole network of blockchains that can be repurposed or developed, right? Those are, it looks like those are being usurped by the powers that be. And why they're being usurped is because the powers that be recognize that the original blockchain was actually a liberating possibility.
I would say that it was never our tool. That would be my frame. I think
Well-
I think people have been sold. Actually, when we were at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, one of the presentations was by a gentleman. His name is Scott Stornetta, and he was out of Stanford, and he actually developed the first distributed ledger system before Bitcoin, before all the Satoshi stuff. And he was working at Bell Labs in New Jersey. It was quite interesting in the talk that he gave because he's much more low profile. People are not as aware of him. But he said that he was very glad to be presenting to this particular venue because often he presents, but it's not within the context of his faith practice. So for me, it was quite interesting to understand that the early origins of the distributed ledger system actually were connected to this longstanding, this other apparatus, for what it's worth, he was talking about this disintermediary third party, that the world would be the witness. The world would be the witness to the transactions. And so for me, if you understand, and he felt that was a good thing, that we were all witnessing everything. I think for the most part, most people would prefer that our transactions not be laid bare in that way.
Well, it seems like the danger is when you have this, what they call the KYC, right? In other words, when your identity is attached to the blockchain, then it really destroys the very original purpose of the blockchain. The original purpose of the blockchain is that you could be permissionless, there would be no central authority, and that nobody would know who you were.
Yeah, that's the story.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is they have seized many assets. Like actually the FBI is one of the largest holders of Bitcoin. So they can get this idea that somehow it's impervious is not accurate. It's part of the narrative. But I would say the other piece is the intention of what the blockchain was, is I actually believe, based on work that I've been doing for the past month or so, that there's actually a project that was underway starting in 1941 called the World Institute, that later evolved into this thing called the Foundation for Integrated Education. And it was established by a gentleman, his name was Julius Stolman. He was ostensibly a lumber baron in Brooklyn, involved in a community that was very prominent in establishing the State of Israel. He ended up working later with a systems theorist. His name is Ervin Laszlo. He's a Hungarian systems theorist whose son is actually connected to this entity called Global Education Futures Forum. I would highly encourage people to look that up. It's run by Pavel Leksha, who's a Russian transhumanist. And so that was my initial rabbit hole. My friend Emily in Maine said, only click this link if you want to go down the rabbit hole. So I went down the GEF rabbit hole. I never quite came back out. But Ervin Laszlo was connected with Julius Stolman, also a gentleman named Oliver Reiser at the University of Pittsburgh. He was a philosopher. And this idea of looking at the noosphere, and later connected to a gentleman named Petrine Sirotkin, who was a Harvard professor of applied sociology, who wanted to commodify altruism. And they were a part of a large group that was looking to, through this Foundation for Integration, build the global brain. And these folks were connected with early cybernetics. The chair of their program was the Henry Margenau. I believe he was the chair of physics at Yale at the time, and his focus was material reality. And these folks were very, very interested in, so the person working with Julius on this, his name was Fritz Kunst, and he was the head theosophist for North America. And he got his start with Annie Besant in Adyar, India. So these individuals were very interested in consciousness. They were interested within this sphere, because I've been mapping all the people who were supporters for their initial conference in 1949. They were connected with Navajo ceremonial ritual, Aboriginal Australians. Petrine Sirotkin's father was a Russian icon painter, Kabbalistic practice. They wanted to know how the mind worked into this global brain. And I think at the time, and again, within the Macy conference setting with Norbert Wiener and Arturo Rosenbluth, looking at like how to get there, but they didn't have the technology at that point. It was very early stages of computing, but they had envisioned that they wanted a global brain. And then by 1973, Irvin Laszlo and Julia Stillman had written a book. It's about a 7-chapter book, and it's called Emerging Humans. It's available on the Internet Archive. It's a compilation of chapters. Like the first one is by Maslow, like Maslow hierarchy of needs. So it's very prominent individuals. Chapter 7 is by a man named Robert Smith, who was at NASA Huntsville, who was imagining he called it the Unibutz, an interplanetary kibbutz, with this sort of different like digital human settlement pattern. And that sounds quite outlandish in 1973, but actually if you've heard of Hanson Robotics, who have developed Sophia and Grace, the humanoid robotic system, the largest deployment of digital identity right now is in Ethiopia. And I think there's a reason behind that. It's actually Charles Hoskinson from Guffey, Colorado, and Cardano at Atala Prism. They're doing digital identity for students and teachers and now the entire country of Ethiopia. They are working closely with Hanson Robotics. Actually, the AI that built the Sophia Mind is from the Sheba Valley in Ethiopia. They developed it there. And so there's this, and Ben Goertzel, who was the brain behind the AI part of the Sophia the robot, actually got his PhD at Temple University in Philadelphia. And he's the one behind Singularity Nut, of using the data to trigger the singularity. That is his attempt.
What is the singularity?
So it's sort of essentially bringing machines to consciousness, to independent consciousness aside from humans. And what's happening is that they want to learn us. So Ben and his father, Ted Goertzel, who was a sociologist at Rutgers Camden, again, not far from Philly, they have a 700-page book where they're imagining like a kibbutz model with this sort of AI sentient blockchain brain. Like they've taken it from the 1941 World Institute model that Julia Stillman had forward, and they're advancing it. Now, again, whether or not they will get there, but this predatory energy that wants to mine the being part of human, I feel very strongly that frequency and acoustics is a huge part. And it's frequency of your emotional state and your heart and your mind waves, but also music. Because the first JCA Licklider, who was the first operator of DARPA, his background was in psychoacoustics. So I don't have that background, but I know it's important. And so I feel like in some ways, the most powerful music is like the music that we started with tonight, is like us in a room with an instrument, sending that energy, and that's the thing it wants. And it wants to know it on blockchain. It wants to know what is your music, because music taps into the soul space, I think, in a way that provides the data that this thing really wants. So anyway, that's my.
And also, I'll just say something on the blockchain thing, because I've had some battles over it. And again, I came into the space when I started working, doing video in the space, very sympathetic and hopeful for the potential of it being, because I've been studying money and I'm like, clearly we need a different system. But there are problems. I found problems with every single crypto that I've found. And I'm actually working on a more in-depth piece that's going to be coming out later this year, going into, the good, bad, and the ugly of the whole thing, just like in a very detailed way, because it's kind of one of those things where there's a lot of topics that overlap with that too, in terms of what is money, who creates the coin. There's the privacy issue. Are you really is your identity going to be on there? That's one issue. But not only that, just the whole concept of life through transaction, life as a market. And so even before that, I think that there are problems even with that ideology of viewing everything as a market exchange, and viewing, the trade, everything's about trade, but also like who creates the tokens, what does that token represent? There's a lot of different pieces of that puzzle that I'm in the process of like really trying to go through each little layer of it, but there's a lot of other underlying philosophical ideas that need to be explored around that as well. So,
I wanted to thank you guys for tackling something that's both so contemporary and so nebulous. It's hard to find an entrance point it's a thing I'm sure a lot of us in this room have struggled with in the last couple of years in talking about these types of things. But what I'm thinking when I'm hearing you both speak about it is accelerationism, which is a fairly good crossroads point for me to access it. And one of the things that I struggle with in trying to unpack this emerging technocracy that we're all going to be subject to and are subject to now is how to move forward into the future with a sense of courage and hope and purpose, because it's very easy to get kind of just, the lack of breathing room is oppressive, so to speak. And so I think hearing Bruz's comment and your response, I keep thinking if we're all nodes on this massive neural network that is this planet, contextualizing it in a way that imagines the intelligence of the planet as already active, already organizing, already full of initiative, then it seems like there's a possibility there for repurposing some of the tools that are used against us in a more organic, holistic way to, spirituality can be something that's obviously very personal and everyone has their own view on it. But I feel like an earth-centered view of combating this type of agenda, this organized globalism, is, I just wanted to hear what your thoughts about that were, because you've kind of flirted with that in some of your language, and I know that both of you have thoughts about it, and I'm just curious what they are. Yeah, I'm all over the place because I'm so stimulated by what you're saying.
I can jump in.
Go for it. Yeah,
okay. So, it does feel overwhelming, right? But I think the more I understand, for me, that maybe this isn't all there is. Like, maybe there's more stuff. Maybe our task is to do the best, like to be creative with what we have, the time we have, the stuff we have, the relationships we have. That I found when I sort of walk out into the world, like opportunities present themselves. So for me, it's not like we have to stop all this thing, but it's like we have to do the next right thing. Like we have, and I think creativity is part of it. Creative communication with one another and with the natural, like there's a reciprocity. Right. And so I would say if anybody's feeling like, I know this is quite like kind of a downer like concept, but there's a really good book by Robin Wall Kimmerer that I love called Braiding Sweetgrass. And so it's Braiding Sweetgrass. Robin Wall Kimmerer, she's a biologist who works at the SUNY Forestry School in New York, but she's a citizen Potawatomi Nation, and so it comes from sort of an indigenous like maternal like framing, and it's sort of a series of essays on her worldview, but she talks about like know your gifts and how to give them, right? And it's this reciprocal connection to nature. So a lot of this is individual communication technology, like ICT. This is like what they want to force us into their atomic clock geospatial model simulation. And so the more we can create with our gifts outside of that, I think that is the disruptive force. And if you understand it as like, I've been reading some books and my learning curve is so big on this, literally. I came into this through education. So the last 2 years I've been learning so many things, but like holographic reality, like how do you create a disruptive waveform? And it may not have to be a tidal wave. It may just be a bit, in this space. I've been doing, and people call me like crunchy hippie. I'm not really a hippie, but it came to me. I used to work at a botanical garden. And I like this idea of the dandelion came because it's a healing plant. It's deeply rooted. It's the plant of urban wastelands in the floor, and it actually cleanses the liver and bile and anger. And so I was like, hey guys, like send me some dandelions and we'll do stuff. I'll take them places. I'll go because I go places and I'll take them and I'll put them, like the first one that we did it on Park Avenue outside the Council on Foreign Relations on Easter. And we just took, like I made this pillow and we just and I'm like, no, we can't leave it on the door because God forbid, the lightning strikes the building and we get blamed. So put it on the tree pit right there. But I quilt. So I made this little pillow and we tore up the social impact contract, that the Rockefeller Foundation funded with Council on Foreign Relations, and we stuffed it in a pillow with some dandelions and we left it there. And we were just out of Crestone. Because I have concerns about Maurice Strong and this one world religion and various things. And so I went there and I make these little puppets, these little felt dolls, and I stuff them full of natural things that I find, and I leave them places. And so, I've been having hard times with my family, both with my father who has Alzheimer's and my kid who doesn't get me. So I had 2 representation of tokens, and I stuck them under, a tree on a waterfall north Crestone Creek, north of town, and just said, hey, do your thing. Jason wanted to decompress from the Mormon Transhumanist Conference by going down to Southeast Utah because it's a place he loves. So I'm like, cool. I'm like, Jason, do you know? It's all about uranium mining and the Navajo. He's like, oh, Allison. And I'm like, no, we totally can go there because I think it's connected, this Manhattan Project and radiation and Human Plus. And so literally I'm standing reading John Trudell poetry, with my little doll lady. And, I had the chance to attend in the summer of 2020 a Sundance and a giveaway on the Cheyenne River Reservation. And it was very small because it had all been closed off because of the lockdowns. But someone gave me this square, a fat quarter of quilting fabric with some sage, and it was the cosmos. And so I was like, oh, I have to, and I've been carrying it around with me. And I said, oh, I'm going to cut off a strip and tying it to the barbed wire fence outside the uranium mine with the thing. And I'm saying, this is not, I have my little bowl, and I'm like, the beauty frequency. And literally this big uranium truck rumbling along. And I don't know that it necessarily matters. I can't guarantee it, but for me, it helps me feel empowered in the face of this giant thing.
Totally.
Can I stop uranium mining? Maybe not, but I can show up, and every day and do I really think someone's gonna climb up the red, clay hill to untie that piece of fabric? But I was there and I said, this isn't okay. And part of the challenge in the resistance space, I feel is that there's the experts or the people, and I'm not here to be your expert really. I'm here to say, this is how I did it. Right. And if some of what stuff I do makes sense to you, then maybe you can do it and build on it. Maybe your gift is cooking, and you go to the place in your community and you build a thing and you just leave the plate of food outside and you're there. I stand in the face of this. Maybe you play music or write poetry or build things, but we can act that out in the world. And I do think that there's a resonance, to me, that there is something. And I'm not here to say don't do all the other big things, don't file the lawsuits or don't go on the big marches or don't, do all those things, do whatever makes you feel empowered. But for me, this is a thing that I've been doing that makes me feel connected. And
I want to say something about that too, just to give a. So this whole process it made a lot of strange bedfellows because, I come into it, I'm like, okay, the smudging and the dolls and what, it's not really my thing.
That's okay, Jason. You film it, that's your thing.
I respect it. And I don't know, I'll give you the short version of it, my thing about religion. I've thought about religion and life and what is this all about and all this, what's consciousness? And things, you ponder these questions and I'm I never get anywhere with it. I have a feeling that there's something more to this. And there's things that I do know that life, has value, animal life, other life, not just my life, but our life. And empathy and love and compassion are sacred things that we should, not only help grow and act out. So those are the basic things. But beyond that, my view about a lot of these things are kind of like the Mad Libs Theory. I came up with the Mad Libs Theory. You guys know the Mad Libs? It was a storybook when you were a kid and you would fill in the blanks. It would have a bunch of blanks. Put a noun here, put an adjective here. And then you'd read it back and it would be a silly story and we'd all laugh. But I think that's what it is. There's all these questions, these mysteries that we don't have answers to. But we can't just leave it blank. We got to put God in here. We got to put whatever it is. So the way I view it is I'm open to the blanks. I don't know. A lot of this is mystery to me. I do think there's more connection. Frequency does seem to be important, but I don't know. And I don't know if, doing a ceremony does anything or not, but I have a lot of friends that do that, and I hope that that's actually doing something. I don't know. But within this process, we've had people connect. A good friend of ours, Drew, who came up and met with us, she grew up in the Mormon church, and she's actually running for governor of Arizona under the Libertarian Party, but she's part Hawaiian. But her dad was in the military, white, so she comes in these weird cross worlds, but she's now dealing with questioning her Mormon faith. We have another friend of ours that's Christian. I would say I'm kind of more atheist, kind of, but spiritual. I don't know.
You don't have to leave it
I don't have a
blank.
container. That's all we say. I don't have a container. But it's like people can come together, and it's not about like whatever this person does, because a lot of people have given her shit about, oh look, she's foo-foo and she's doing ceremony. It's like, well, like I'm here doing the video, and it's not. I don't know what that's all about, like in terms of if there's something there or not. But I'm here because I feel connected to different people who come from different perspectives and different beliefs. But there is a thread that connects me to people, even though some of the people have come from more conservative background that are starting to question things, go like, wait a minute, what's going on? And so we're all in a process in different places. So I would just like to throw that out there. That's not like a monolithic thing here. Like we can come together and have conversation, and maybe there's things we agree and maybe things we disagree or whatever.
How's it going? I just want to say thanks to Jason for his fearlessness and not caring what other people think and choosing to really, really focus on some issues that matter but also piss a lot of people off. And like it doesn't work well sometimes, but I appreciate your ability to just say, I don't really care, and just to do what's right. No, you care so much, but you don't care what other people think. So I do care
what other people think. It's actually been very painful for me to take some of the positions that I've taken.
Okay, but yes, you get what I'm
still
saying.
do it.
You
Yeah,
get what I'm saying.
you.
Like,
You
and I
persevere.
could go on and on. Like I could drag this on, but I don't really like when people come to my events and don't ask questions. So the question would be, you were so close there, and I did ask the question. I said,
Yeah.
well, what is it? Like, lead us. And you were
Yeah.
getting there, and that was
Yeah.
what we were kind of getting is like leaving us on the solution, because we've all spent so much time like, our government killed 3,000 people and lied to us on 9/11, and whether you knew it or not, and now you know it, or maybe it took you 1 year or 10 years or
Yeah.
22 years or whatever it is, we figured it out. And so I think, but we focused on the problem for so long, and I think a lot of us are really, really begging for the solution. I think some people have found crypto as their solution, and then you're pointing out what a lot of us knew. It's the cashless currency. It's exactly what the bankers wanted right from the get-go, and there's no way they would let something like that happen if they didn't control it. But what's the solution? And this is the same question I asked Jason. It's like, if somebody's got $10,000, where do you put it? And guide us and show us a little bit of like, hey, this is where my capital would go, because there is people with the capital to support your vision or this vision, whatever it is. And if we're focused on our time on infighting people who are doing really good work for many, many years, and you're just maybe awakening 2013, what's the solution? Because we've been begging for that solution since 2013. And like, I'm just curious, and I welcome all of us to maybe just pose that, not to just like take one person's solution, but I just offer, like, while we're here, yes, I didn't disagree with one thing you said. I just disagreed with how you didn't show up at the greater reset to offer your solution, because you were offered the chance to offer your solution to lots of people online, lots of people in person, and you would have been received by those people. And you chose to get on YouTube, which is very technocratic. So what's your solution?
Well, so like I said, I think what's happening is and this is my perspective, is that this is a reckoning, okay? And for whatever reason, like, I'm coming from Philadelphia. When I was in the midst of my education journey, I actually connected with someone who is an activist in Massachusetts, who was a veteran who was at Standing Rock. And so that was a big piece of my awakening as well, because you don't know what you don't know until you see it, right? And this person was actually there the day of the raid. And so I was following Unicorn Riot that whole day and seeing the MRAPs coming down, and like, oh, okay, no, this is what we are, right? This is what we are. And I wouldn't have had necessarily that frame had I not had these relationships. And so this person who was sort of a mentor to me to open up new frames of reference was like, let's look at what democracy was. Like, let's look at what our relationship of freedom, because a book I talk a lot about is Stephen Newcomb's Pagans in the Promised Land, the dome of domination, right? You have freedom if you live under the dome. By our rules, you have all the freedom within this space. If you want to live outside of the dome, then we will annihilate you, because we can't have that, right? And so I'm coming to terms with this larger reckoning of what we are on this country. Like, not from a point of wagging fingers and saying you're bad or this, or it's like, what are we? And how did we get here? Because we came from someplace. And so that reckoning, to me, is part of the solution to this sickness. It's not strictly an economic reckoning, it's a larger reckoning of the mythology of what we are. And I don't know where we come out the other end, because I think it's a collective one. We have individual journeys that we have to come to it within ourselves. Like, I can't make anyone else feel the same way I feel about this. Like, people, it would be unreasonable for me to think that people would necessarily hold the feelings in exactly the same way I did, because your lived experience is different from mine, right? And so we have to start that road and then work our way through. If I stood here and said, oh, I have a solution to stop the next phase of globalization and telepresence robotic labor, like, I think you would probably call bullshit on me, right? If I'm like, I've got the answer, guys, like, follow me this way to the non-robotic future. Like, it's not reasonable. Like, do I have the solution for, like, global currency systems? Like, I know the scope of this challenge. And I know the role of blockchain in this challenge as well. And so it's a conversation that must be had collectively and with care amongst each other, and to get to a point of consensus. But I wouldn't follow anyone who claimed that they alone had the answer. Because if you actually believed my frame is that we need this collective reckoning and to figure things out, then I would be a fraud to say, like, I had the answer. So I'm not trying to cop out, but I think that until we get the general public to a point of actually knowing the scope of what's happening, you can't have the conversation. Literally, like, how many people in Denver do you think know the stuff that just came out of my mouth? Like, not many. And so how do you have the conversation for the solution if you don't even know what the problem is? And so my calling, I feel, is to lay bare what I have found, how I see it. You guys may see it differently. Like, I welcome if I, like, lay out the facts and say, I don't know, this is what it looks like to me. Doesn't look good. Do you have a different perspective? But for the most part, that hasn't happened yet. Like, I kind of thought that first year of lockdown, people would be like, oh yeah. And it wasn't because I wanted credit or brownie points or something. I just wanted that piece to be part of the analysis. And it's not. Like, we're still, like, harping on fear, death, destruction, China. Like, there's many things that are happening that are part of the drumbeat of this learning curve. But most of the stuff I'm talking about is only barely trickling in. And literally, I've been talking about this since the first month, like Jason can attest. So, like, that's where I'm at. Until we can get to a common level of understanding, we can't get the solution, because it actually has to be a social solution and not like, oh, I've got the answer.
Right. And a lot of people that have challenged Allison, one of my big frustrations is they're challenging based on their thing that they're promoting. Right. They're not incorporating or even addressing anything. Like, almost every single time, it's almost like all this stuff that she just laid out, it went in one ear out the other. Like, they didn't. It's like they're not addressing. It's like, do you not just hear what I just said? Like, they're digitizing the world. They're making a metaverse. They're destroying ecology in order to do that. And they're like, yeah, but I've got a cryptocurrency that I'm making money off of, which I get. And there are, look, you can do good things with Federal Reserve notes. The Federal Reserve notes is a horrible fucking system. So it's like, I'm not saying there aren't good use cases for these different things. And as far as the solution, I don't know what the solution is either. But I'm with her, and I've been saying this even before I met her, and a lot of you guys know me. Like, the first thing is we have to understand the problem.
Yeah.
And then, like, because I was trying to tell people, all my liberal friends, about the banking system. And they would not listen. I'm like, listen, you care about climate change, you care about all the poverty, all these things, war, like, this is the source. Like, this is the source of it all. And you don't understand this, you can't do anything. They're like, well, what's the solution? I'm like, don't even talk to me about a solution. You don't even understand how the system works.
Yeah. Well, in hearing all this information, you want to recoil. I'm so sorry I'm interrupting. You want to recoil, but it's like, you have to go deeper into listening to it. And what I was just trying to ask earlier is just like, how do we balance, like, moving into the information even though it feels tremendously negative and difficult, and also, like, maybe having a vision of how these things can be subverted because the thing's in motion, like you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like it's going to go faster, it's going to go harder, it's going to go everywhere. So it's like, are there ways that like that it can be steered, or are we trying to pull back from it? And that fundamental tension is like really what I feel like everyone is talking about. I feel like,
and me personally, I'm kind of in a pull back from it phase. Like, I deleted my Facebook. I'm like, I like communicating with people, and I miss the people that are on there, but I know how insidious this thing is. And like, I mean, smartphones. You know what SMART stands for? Self-monitoring and reporting technology. And people are like, they made that up afterward. Like, no, that's actually what it was, and that's what it's always been. You know, think about that.
A super objective question. Why would you deny an offering to speak to people truth, your solution, or no solution, just the truth about the problem? Why would you deny the request to speak at the Greater Reset? I just don't understand that piece. I want to hear, like, I'd rather use YouTube than speak to the audience that wants to hear it, that is completely up against the Great Reset, like the problem. And these people are ready, and they've offered you, and I just don't get that. I want to understand your side of view, and that's why I'm here. I drove an hour to see you.
Okay, all right. Essentially, I mean, I trust that people can come up to their own opinion, right? I have plenty of material out there I have many, many videos, and I have a lot of stuff. I had positions against like the Rockfin platforms, blockchain media. I don't feel like I can pick and choose how I relate to people. That's sort of the bottom line. So that's sort of where I'm at. I trust that people who want to compare opinions can do that. And there's nothing, So that's sort of where I'm at. So it was my principle to say, it actually was not done in any sort of spiteful way. I said it very nicely. I just said, I don't think I'm a good fit, because the initial one was very much about blockchain. And I said, it's just not there are quite a few interviews that I turned down because it's just not a good fit. And I don't look courting controversy. Like, I do actually take firm positions on issues that I think matter. And sometimes people find those controversial, but I'm not here to like create controversy so I can create drama and clicks. I don't really like drama, actually. So that's sort of where.
They're pretty good, though. I didn't see any focus on solution for a while. It was definitely like.
Okay, I think you had your spot. There's a couple other folks. Yeah.
Hey, not sure where to begin. The issues you bring up are so vast and so almost unimaginable in terms of trying to visualize how this would work out, how it will happen, how it's unfolding, and you're trying to explain all that. But it's still almost incomprehensible. And yet at the same time, there are all these other things afoot, right? Cognitive warfare programs that they openly acknowledge that it's beyond psyops, it's beyond ideology. We're going to, through nanotechnology and chemicals and other means, essentially change humans, not just our enemies. Okay, whoa. And then there's, the crazy public health response that is not based on science, the undisclosed objects in the vaccines that appear to be have self-assembling properties, and go along with various patents for receivers, transducers, or whatever. So it's like 12 different plots afoot, or more probably, all interconnected. And it's very depressing, daunting. It's hard to talk to anybody because very few people would like to look at any of these things.
I never thought it was going to be that. When I started out, I thought it was standardized testing.
Right. We have a very strong, motivation in psychology as people to be perky and to, look at the bright side and so on. So it's hard to even begin to think about these things. But there are some good things also afoot. So there are people who are organizing alternative healthcare systems, alternative health insurance systems, alternative blood transfusion systems, alternative economies with barter and, time banks and so on. And I think we need to actively get involved in that stuff and figure out what role can we play? Even if they install all this stuff, people can still live differently and try and hold out as long as they can. And I guess hopefully there'll be ways to promote information enough to make people want to change and rebel.
Well, and the piece that I'm trying to bring into this is the pay for success finance, because I've had like a couple podcasts with Sarah G about this, is that preventative wellness is going to be part of this program and alternative stuff. And they're going to create wellness investment markets. And so what I've tried to talk to like alternative providers is to say, when this goes on an electronic health record system, when it gets tied into Medicaid and Medicare, people who are in the business of healthcare provisions, even in the alternative space, are going to have to make a decision because the data is going to be fed back to the impact markets, right? And so they'll need to know, like I'm saying, like in the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be the system. So you're going to have to like be able to figure out like your business model, right? And be prepared to be with that. Like, don't let it surprise you, because this is the road that it's going down, is independent insurance, people investing in your health. And it's and I'm not saying it to be a downer. I'm just saying if we don't, I'm just one voice. And I really thought it would pick up more steam by now. But if we don't know the game that we're in, people with very good intentions will walk down the road, and my fear is that it will be too far before they realize what happened. And if the pay for success finance piece tied to the hedge funds is central, and a lot of this has to do actually with free market economics and libertarianism. There's an Idaho white paper about like essentially how to get the government out of your business, but then it's reframing churches as being like investors in their people, okay? And so when they talk about like blockchain free market economics, people might think like, oh, I'm gonna have my own small town, local, education options, local healthcare options, but really with the current power dynamic, we're talking like Peter Thiel is going to be invested in you, sort of thing. And that was one of the stops we made today. I was not aware until someone brought it to my attention that Palantir actually has relocated from the Bay Area to downtown Denver. Okay?
Denver,
Yeah. And so, and why this is important is that in the 4 test cases in Santa Clara County that were advanced, there was a pre-K, an early literacy, a homelessness social impact bond, and a mental health social impact bond. The homelessness social impact bond and the mental health social impact bond, the way these work is that they have third-party evaluators to make it appear fair, right? That you set the impact metrics, and then you run the intervention, and you get the data, and then you have the evaluator. In the homelessness one, which is called Welcome Home, and the wellness, which is called Partners in Health, the third-party evaluator was Palantir. So they are both in the business of probably the surveillance tracking and the deal fulfillment. And why did they move here? It's because y'all are next up. You have been set up for pay for success finance by Hickenlooper and Polis. You're there, and it's going to be for the kids, it's going to be for the homeless, it's going to be for workforce development if people are not educated about what that is. And I feel this imperative to say we have to try to keep people off of blockchain. Like literally they tell you blockchain, like at that point, like I don't know how how do you end up, people say like, would you even know if you're on blockchain? And I'm not sure because I never did this before, right? But like Charles Hoskinson in his deployment, they're after Africa. They're after the continent of Africa, and they have multiple deployments. Some of them are cell phone contracts. They put you on blockchain when you get your cell phone contract renewal, right? They have different modus, like they have land title things, they have education. There are many different elements, and I don't know that you would necessarily even know. So until we can educate people like about the reality of the situation, I feel like it's gonna be really hard. Not that it's impossible, but I feel like until we can get the education, like people to fully appreciate that, and that's where I need your help. And again, I'm not pitted against these more prominent personalities. I wish that they would engage with this material. And if they say that they have a difference of opinion, okay, then justify that difference of opinion. But to simply look the other way and not incorporate it into the analysis at this point is no longer acceptable, because it's
And
happening.
they've all been presented this information from many different sources. It's not, they can't say that they don't know. It's
being ignorant. That's
right.
part of the plan.
And this isn't just about health. I mean, so a lot of people are concerned about the immediate threat, which is like, I don't want the vaccine. I don't like the mandates and the masks and all that. But this is feeding into something so much bigger. So people are fighting this little battle right here, but some of their heroes are actually promoting and invested in the end game. And that's what we're trying to, and so people get threatened by that. And so, it's not easy, but we need to move away. Like people people accused her. See you guys, thank you for coming. Oh, cool. But people are like, oh, she's trying to build a cult following or whatever. Or, it's like, well, she's like blocking people. She like, as someone who's been trying to promote her work, it's been difficult for me because I'm like, you're not supposed to just block everybody, And I would have loved for her to go talk to the people at the Greater Reset, but I understand her position, and she's trying to take a principled position, and maybe that's what we need right now. We need, even if it means like losing some people and having a smaller audience, but I think we need to get away from like hero worship, and people accuse me of hero worship with her, and I'm like,
I'm the cult leader.
I'm like, listen, I'm doing work with her because like I'm like looking for holes in her research, and I'm like, nope, that's true. Nope, that's great. Oh shit, that's true too. It's like
I would love to be wrong. Like y'all, if we could like actually lay out a compelling argument why none of this is happening, that would make me really happy.
Yeah, and then so the people that are attacking on, oh, she's personality things or whatever. I'm like, even if you don't like her, that's okay. Don't like her, but look at the actual what she's saying, because this is the thing. This is what they're building. This is what they're moving toward. And if you don't understand that thing that they're building, you're gonna get pulled into it from some alternative source.
Because as we
They're
talked
gonna pull
about,
you in
like
from the
the
side.
cognitive warfare, they're very like beyond the neurotech, which is part of it. And again, that's very overwhelming. I think they want us to stay in the state of like paralysis, right? And if it is what it is, right? Like we have the time we have. There's really nothing we can do about like nanoneural stuff. Like if it's in the environment, it is. But I don't think they actually know how the body works. Like I don't actually think that they're accomplishing all the things that they think they're accomplishing. And some of it is coming from, like I've been in touch with people who identify as targeted individuals, right? And the ones who actually seem the most grounded in what is a really terrible situation are people who have a strong faith practice. And so there is something beyond that which we have. And I think that's what we have to cultivate, both individually and in community with like-minded people, is that strength in that which is beyond the material. Because if we are limited within our engagement to what we see with our senses, it doesn't look good. But if you imagine that there's stuff that is beyond just the immediate of what we're perceiving, like I think that's what it's just like John Trudell said, like we are power. They don't want us to understand our connectedness and our power in this. And it may sound flaky, but I'm not a nihilist. I actually am not a nihilist. I don't think that this is a done deal by any means. And that like just I have to say that pushback from the Mormon transhumanist folks, they are really upset with us. And literally it was just 4 of us who showed up and asked some like pretty gentle questions of them, right? They're not counting on anyone actually poking holes in their stuff, because once you shine a light to it, you're like, of course not. Of course we're not putting our brains in robots. No. And if you get ahead of them by like a couple months or a year, like they don't know what to do with that, because no one's supposed to put the pieces together before they do, before they're ready to roll it out.
The majority of people who are building this and that are doing this actively, even at high levels, don't actually we've had this conversation back. She's like, do they know? And I'm like, no, they don't. They don't know. They don't know. You can be high up and be building something and not know what it is you're a part of. There are very few people, I think, in this world who actually have that, or the orchestrators of like, this is what we want to do.
I have a visual. So I've been working like for a really long time on this research project that was catalyzed by the Learning Economy Foundation, which has a presence here in Colorado. They want to pay you to learn. I think the AI wants your learning data, right? And they've actually developed a digital wallet for children in association with Lego and MIT Media Lab. Okay, and it's interesting because the digital wallet is called Taurus, Tours, which is the heart makes the toroidal thing, like field. So I think that there's like wordplay going on. And so they want the kids to play with Lego and then earn skills badges, verifiable credentials for 6-year-olds. Because that's what every 6-year-old need is, a verifiable credential, right? And they're going to take this global brand, right? You know, Lego, and they're going to roll it out, and it's connected to the World Bank finance system, right? And so I've been doing this research, and I've been looking into Lego. Oh my gosh, like I can't tell you, because you have to be willing to let go of these ideas of things that you had that were not what you thought. You know, like literally Lego was the largest funder of MIT Media Lab since the beginning. Right, and Piaget, this guy Seymour Papert, was working with Lego in like the computing stuff, and it's very complicated. But essentially, Lego is developing augmented reality technology, and so initially it was just scan the QR code and see the 3D version of the Lego kit, right? But now they've moved on to what they called they're like building programs where you get one of these complex sets like the town or whatever, and you're all supposed to sit together like a family around the kitchen table and log your project. You log it on the QR code, and then everybody else with their own device logs theirs too, right? So there's like 5 or 6 people, and they all have QR codes, and they're all logged into the project. And the AI will tell you what part you're building. Okay, you do that part, and you do this part, and when that part's done, you build it on that part. And so so really what they're building is telepresence labor project management. Right? They're not telling you that that's what they're building, but they're building like log into the job, everybody does their little part, and then the parts at the end, they all come together to the fancy town kit or the carnival fair or whatever.
Okay. You need to tell that story
Yeah.
because that made me understand.
Okay. Well, at the end, I think what's happening is that's how they're building the singularity, or they think they are, is that everybody's just got, and they get the pat on the back, good job, here's a badge, you did so nice on that job. Here's the next one. And it's personalized, they say, to your skill set, right? So the teenager gets the harder one, and the 5-year-old gets the different one, and everybody gets their own part. Good job, here's your badge. And then at the end, poof, the singularity. And nobody looked at the picture on the box to know what they were building. And that's what it feels like, is that you've got these high connected academics, and you've got the think tank leaders and the book authors and the finance people. And, you know, nobody knows what the picture is on the box. Nobody knows what that is. And I think it's by design, that it's by design. And so the focus where a lot of people are expending energy on, like, where's the cabal and who are the people in charge and who's responsible, and we're going to punish them, and like what is the punishment? Is it injections? Is it bad? Like, what do you understand as the problem? Because my understanding of the problem is much wider than most people's understanding of the problem. So how are you actually going to, like, if you were to point the finger at who's responsible, there would be very few people left out. Like, granted, the degrees of responsibility would vary, but we're all in the machine. I mean, I'm here today because my husband works at a university that is rolling this stuff out. I'm not saying that I'm clean, that, you know, trust me because I'm perfect. I'm not. I'm trying to disassemble the thing I'm standing on. And it's scary. I'm sure it scares my husband. You know, but yeah, I'm here because guess what? I don't want to live as a cyborg. I don't want my kid to live as a cyborg. So what other choice do I have? Go take some dandelions and throw them down in the snow. Like, that's what I got.
So I'd like to make a single point. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about in the last year is the very notion of freedom, and how in the early days of like the United States, the notion of freedom was related to sovereignty. So sovereignty was this God-given thing, and the idea was that the highest form of sovereignty was the individual. That sovereignty could not exist really in a collective, but it did exist in a collective, but only by virtue of the fact that it existed first in the individual, right? Does that make sense? So it's like saying that the highest form of sovereignty is a single person, a consciousness, right? And a lesser form of sovereignty is a group mind. And a lesser form of sovereignty is an AI mind, hierarchically speaking, right? What's happening that I see, a core problem that has to be solved, is that we have an inversion of the principles. We have allowed society to impose a sense of sovereignty or authority above the individual. And that's very, very dangerous. That's probably the single most dangerous thing that's happening in the world right now, I think, right? Because what happens is Now that external authority, that assumed or believed authority, which could be the government, which could be the church, which could be a corporation, which could be,
The opinions of your followers on Twitter?
yeah, whatever, right? If we believe that they actually have the authority, right, that's when they can tell us that we got to put this thing in our body, right? And that to me is the mortal sin of it all, right? The very fact that somebody can say, you need to put this in your body to protect this bigger thing out here, to me that's criminal.
Well, I would
Because-
just say, like, just again, as my position as a Philadelphian, that there's stories we live in, right? And because you're raised within a context and you're given your cultural stories. Now, many of the founding fathers were actually Freemasons, and they were speculative landowners, and there are elements of stories that we don't get told, like they were surveying land across the Appalachians that the British told them not to, and that the stamp tax was for the British to keep the surveyors like Jefferson and Washington out of indigenous land, that the British said, don't go over there, that's not your stuff. And they're like, oh, it looks pretty good. And then the British are like setting up, militias to keep them out, because they're busy in India and other places, they got their other stuff going on. And so there's parts of the story that don't get told. And my former mentor, Tim Scott, he has an article in Dissident Voice. It's called The Duplicitous Constitution. But literally he does this analysis of the Constitution that is structured in a way to preference landed men. It just is. And the Bill of Rights is set aside because they exist as the mythological rights, but until you have the resources to take it to the Supreme Court, which most people don't, the time and the money, they're not actually accessible to you. Like to the poor people. Like you can't actually get, they're there and they're aspirational, but they're not given. So within the story, like I understand the sovereignty. I think it's somewhat like the blockchain thing. And again, this is just how I've been thinking about it lately, is if you imagine the universe as sort of a holographic model, or that we are all connected, like that there is this unity, and that's sort of behind like the Hinduism, element, that there's this unifying force.
Consciousness.
Yeah, right. And so it's we're all somehow representatives, and I'm working on this Michael Talbot book. They describe it as like a river, not that we're all the same, but there's rapids and there's cataracts and there's tide pool, there's different elements of this river, but we're all part of it. And how I've pictured it is that the idea of the individual, they would like for us to rise up out of that and be like, I'm the individual. Like I deny that I'm part of this other thing, like really own that piece of it. And that the thing that's looking to put the specimens on the shelf is like, thank you very much. Gotcha. And so there is something about the sense of the individual. And I don't dispute, like bodily autonomy is central. But I think if we didn't have a sick society that was run by BlackRock, we wouldn't be asking people to be human plus. And I don't think it's the river that's telling us to be human plus, it's something outside. And so my frame would be that we actually have to fix the thing that's making society sick that would ask that of us, rather than to say that we are separate from our social relations. Because I do feel like that there are ways of being in the world that predate, the colonization force. I mean, we tried to, kill the Indian to save the man, right? Like Carlisle Indian School is a couple hours outside of Philadelphia. We were the model of the residential school program. We are going to erase that to remake. And I feel like right now, that's where we're in the human plus. We are going to kill the natural human to create the human plus model. And that is the imperative. And so it's just, not to discount your story, but there's other ways to tell that story that maybe incorporate more the reciprocity. But you don't want to have reciprocity within a poisoned society. And I feel like we're in a poisoned society. And I don't know, I would be, presumptuous to presume that I have the antidote, but I think the antidote involves having a clearer understanding of what we're in, the soup.
And I don't know if you plugged it already or not, because it gets plugged a lot, but Stephen Newcomb's book, Pagans in the Promised Land, is like a must read. It changed a lot of my things that I thought I knew, just ways of looking at things.
He's an independent scholar. He's Shawnee
Law
Lenape. He's based in California, but he spent his entire adult life reading the papal bulls, essentially because the papal bulls are the basis of property law in the United States. Wow. Like it is. Like they go back, and it's not old history, because I'm trying to remember what's the woman everybody are, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She cited, the papal bulls in like within the past decade, like in a Supreme Court ruling to dispossess like the New York. The Oneida Nation of their lands. Like it's not a dead law, it's still there. And so, but no one goes back to actually look. And he's quite masterful at his analysis of the language. And he's the one who actually expressed to me, and we've had several conversations about the dome of domination. And he's like, Allison, like the Liberty Bell is the dome. And it hangs from the yoke. And they want, the metaverse is the next dome. Like, welcome to the Truman Show. You're in the dome. Like, if you're content to live in the dome as a cyborg digital twin, then you're going to get along okay. If you're not, it's going to be harder. But I feel like actually one of the little things we did on the equinox, we drove up to Alta Ski Resort outside of Salt Lake, where they birthed the Internet and the Human Genome Project. Same ski resort, right? And I drove up there. Jason drove up in this terrible, like, rental sedan that was not equipped for snow. It is snowing harder and it's snowing harder. And I'm like,
I'm driving around cars.
He's like, don't worry,
stuck.
I'm really good at this. And then like 15 minutes later, he's like, you're right, this is really bad, but we can't turn around. And we're like going uphill. And of course, all the like Sunday skiers are like, chomping at the bit because like, we're like a little sedan. And we get to the top and Jay's like, I can't even get out because we might get stuck. And so I hop out and I've got my Liberty Bell, which Jason said not to break, that would be very bad form. But so I put it down in the snow, and I had someone gave me cedar shavings, so I made this spiral out from the Liberty, like we're bigger than that. And I had these like flowers that I bought at the grocery store. I'm like, spray of flowers, and dropped some stuff on the ground, and then we hopped back in the car and drove down the mountain. But like that's this energetic imprint. Like we're more than the Liberty Bell. Like we're more than that, and we have to figure that part out. Like that's like, as the Philadelphian, because literally I read my friend Tim's article like in the shadow of Independence Hall. And Independence Hall sits, it's very interesting. It's the Independence Hall, the second bank, which is a second attempt at the Federal Reserve. Between them is the American Philosophical Society, which was Ben Franklin's, and it's electrical. We are bioelectrical. This is very central. As much as it's acoustics, it's about water and electricity. And so all of these scientific experiments go way back. So their three collections are the Founding Fathers stuff, early science, and indigenous language and culture. And they want to go package all that stuff up and put it away on the shelf. And then erase it in the real world and then just hold it. And that siting on the mall is next to DuPont. It's former headquarters. They're not there anymore, but for the longest time DuPont was there. Federal courts, the FBI, the Federal Reserve, the NPR station. And then on the other side, you've got the Mint, you've got the American Bible College, Mikveh Israel, which is like the second oldest Orthodox Jewish congregation that's connected to the Netanyahu's family, and the Bourse. And then a block down, you've got the Chemical Heritage Society, and then another half block down, you've got the Penn Center for Advanced Judaic Studies, which if you haven't seen, I have this really, I found it fascinating blog post I did about the Nam Shub of Enki and Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. And Dropsy College, which is about 15 minutes from my house. It was the first college of Hebrew and cognate languages, and Benjamin Netanyahu's dad taught there, and Noam Chomsky's dad taught there. And eventually it fell apart, and they collected it at Penn, and they put all of these ancient Babylonian Sumerian texts a block and a half from Independence Mall. So there's these layers of energetic historic imprints on the land of this stuff. And
That's in Philadelphia?
Yeah, this is all in Philly. I mean, I'm the and then at the end is actually an Isamu Noguchi statue that was designed in the 40s when he was in connection with Buckminster Fuller, but not executed until the 80s. And it's a wireframe pyramid. On top of the pyramid is a key. And then there's a lightning bolt and a abstracted kite. So it's Ben Franklin's. But I'm convinced that key is the digital identity. It's your public-private key. And that the pyramid is the metaverse. And that to sandwich lightning, the natural electricity between the kite and the key is like man's containment of nanoelectronics, like into this metaverse space. And that sits right at the end of Independence Mall by the Constitution Center. And like, can I prove all of this? I can't prove all of this, but Like you follow the resonance. Like I can lean into it. And I'm like, I know it's about frequency. I know it's about emotion, love, spirit, and stuff that it can't capture that it wants. It wants to quantify love. It wants to quantify altruism. That is what the Foundation for Integrated Education was about. Like I have been tracking every single sponsor, participant in that 1949 conference, and they are after consciousness and love and things that are not quantifiable, and to try to put them into quantities.
So you just kind of recapped what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
You basically recapped it, which is that all of those things, right, that are externalized are really attempting to be on top of what you're saying, when in fact we, the spirit, needs to be on top of it.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this inversion thing. And I think it's really important for people to understand it to the point where that can be articulated. Because the beauty of the original Constitution, for whatever value it had, right, in establishing a kind of free society, was that it was in fact articulated. But it hasn't been fully articulated. And now the articulation is being usurped. It's being inverted, right? It's like even though we kind of get those principles, right, but we can't live by them anymore, right? Like consider this principle of innocent until proven guilty, right? Imagine that policemen can shoot a guy coming out of the 7-Eleven because he's waving his arms and get away with that murder, when in fact the principle of this land is supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, right? That cop was executioner, judge, and jury, and got away with it. So where was the principle? Innocent until proven guilty, right? So those principles that are sacrosanct to a free society, to a spiritual realm, they have to be really articulated in a way that they become the law.
But that sounds like you might be selling smart contracts.
Well, and you
'Cause
said the
that's-
law.
yeah,
So I want to say something, because even before I met Allison, a lot of you have been knowing me, and I started to realize that there's something, actually even in high school, I kind of had this kind of, there's a discord here between the real, the natural world, and then the fictional world. So it's like there's this grid that's being laid on top, or the digitization of it now. The real world is ecology. You go out in nature, there's wildlife, there's natural life, and we're real, us, and then our relationships, our relationships with each other, with ecology. That's the real world. Okay, there's a whole bunch of things that are fictions that keep being laid on top of it, and the world's become inverted, where the fiction is actually more important than the real thing. The financial sector in America is actually greater than the real goods and services economy. And money is a fiction. All money is a fiction. And the law is a fiction. So we're looking to the law. And so it's like, so a lot of people are looking to the Constitution to save us. I'm like, there's ideas in the Constitution that I absolutely agree with. But I'm not like married to the Constitution. I'm not looking for some, like document to save me. I'm not looking for some outlet. But we have to get our relationship with the real natural world back in order. That's okay. We can have tools. We can have laws. We can come up with these things. We have digital tools.
I think you said the magic word, that they're just tools.
Well, they're not just tools, because like with money, like for example, money, it's not just a tool, because the tool often itself is not value neutral. You build a nuclear bomb. Right. Say, I built a nuclear bomb for deterrence. Well, before you even built that, you extracted uranium from the earth. Right. You've got this substance now you have to do something with. So even with the phones, like a phone, I can use a phone for good or bad. I use cameras. I mean, people have accused us of being Luddites and anti-tech. Like I use tech all day long. And I love it. It's fun. I enjoy it. I also know there are major problems with it, and I'm willing to talk about that. But even just the creation of my camera that I'm using back there, it involved extraction, it involved labor, coercive. So these things aren't value neutral. They have values built into them. And so like the money thing, money's not just a tool. The way you design it, if you design it as a debt, or if you design, who gets to create it, who gets to destroy it? Like it's not a value neutral tool. So, but where was I going with that? But anyway, just the natural world. There's just it's on a base level. That's really what we need to get down to, is just whatever we do, whatever activity we make, whatever solutions we come up with, need to put the real above everything else. And we're so attached to the toys and the tools, that we think they're tools or whatever. And like, I'm not, or yeah, you name it. Like, but we're,
Well, especially because what's coming, and this is something about the Colorado, right? The digital identity and stuff, like that they've got, they're trying to make essentially when I stepped into this space and I thought it was about standardized testing and standardized curriculum, really they need a standardized world to run. Like the metaverse is a standardized world and the standards are around whatever they decide the human labor structure that is going to be and whatever the natural world parameters are going to be. And they're building, we will literally be digital citizens of the world. Like your digital twins, there won't be any national borders. And again, I'm not coming at this from a nationalist space. There are some people who frame things strictly nationalist and they imagine like that the immigrants are the danger. And I'm like, guys, you don't even understand remote robotics. Like the immigrant, literally I have papers from the UN that say we can't wait for the day until the Mexicans stay in Mexico and mow the lawns in Texas remotely. We can't wait. No, I'm serious. We can't wait until like the Kenyan house cleaners will clean the hotel rooms in Norway from Kenya. Then we don't even have to see them. Right? And that's literally the future that they're talking about. And I'm like, and there's a movie called Sleep Dealer that talks about that actually. It was a Sundance film. So, all of the standards have to be exactly the same. Whether that's a Polish housekeeper or a Kenyan, they all have to, everything has to be standardized. And so the model for this is actually Estonia, because they take a small area and then they pilot it there. And Estonia, you can be a digital citizen of Estonia. And I have friends who work in like the freelance space who do it like to get like payment access or healthcare benefits through Estonia. Now, Tim Draper was one of the key figures that helped set that up, right? Well, Tim Draper isn't any like, I mean, he's a venture capitalist and you know, Draper, Kaplan, and Richards is central in the impact investing space. And in fact, the AI law in Estonia is called KRAT law, K-R-A-T-T, and it's named after, it's like the equivalent of the golem. They create found objects in straw, and this idea that you can animate inanimate objects to do your bidding. And literally, Estonia has chosen that as their AI law for digital citizens on blockchain. Everything is on blockchain. So, like as Estonia goes, the goal will be to scale the whole world that way, because none of the metaverse works if it's not standardized and probably like run on the atomic clocks that are in Boulder. It all has to be run from space and standardized. And so like what we imagine our rights and privileges, they literally are going to put that on blockchain and run it as a global, like the world computer, a HAL, a decentralized autonomous, that is their goal. Now, whether they get there, and I don't, again, I would hope that we don't get there, but people aren't getting the context. They're not getting the bigger picture.